We're really excited to be here today with Steve Polich to be talking about incidents, the job site. So I'll just start with a quick intro of who I am. My name is Janan Guillaume, and I'm the Vice President of Product here at AlignOps. And just really excited to be here with Steve today. I'm going to do a little intro to him and then mostly hand over the reins to him, but it's going to be a really interesting hour for us with Steve. Note, if you do have questions along the way, you can use the chat function to put in your questions. There will be some time for Q&A at the end as well. So you can hold on to your questions or you can post them in chat and we'll get to them when we're done listening to Steve. So with that, Steve, besides being the co-founder of Safety Reports, Steve has spent much of his career in the insurance industry as a loss control consultant. During this time, he has visited thousands of job sites and had the opportunity to investigate numerous workplace incidents. So Steve will use some of the experience and knowledge he's gained over the years to talk to us today about incident causation theory. And more importantly, he'll share best practices we can all implement to address the causal factors that lead to so many incidents. So let's kick things off. Steve, can you just start by explaining what we mean by an incident?
Sure. Thanks, Janan, for the introduction. I appreciate that and the chance to speak with everyone here today on this topic. Just real quick, before we get started, I just want to let everyone know that, the best practices that we're going to discuss today, I don't want to give the impression starting out that I have this silver bullet that's going to fix everything, right? I guess I should say something that would prevent all accidents or incidents from happening. That's not the goal of this presentation. My goal is to convey some of the thoughts or the ideas that I hope will give you some insight as to why incidents occur, and more importantly, what you can do to help prevent them or at least minimize the factors that lead to these incidents. So with that, let's go ahead and get started and just define what we're talking about when we use the term incident. An incident, simply unexpected, undesirable event, especially one resulting in damage or harm. And I might add that it interrupts the activity at hand, right? So that's the definition that we're going to use. So by this definition, this implies that not all incidents necessarily result in damage or harm. We call those near misses. So we're going to include near misses in this definition. So to clarify, an incident that results in damage or harm, we often refer to as maybe an accident. We're going to refer to as an incident. When an incident occurs where let's say there's no damage or harm, it's just an interruption of the activity at hand, that's a near miss. So what I'm saying here is just simply that we're going to include both as we go through this. And if I use the term accident versus incident, just understand that that was maybe a slip of the tongue, and we're talking about incidents, which refers to both. So as an example, say a worker is working from height, accidentally drops his hammer, right? That's an unexpected, undesirable event, probably interrupted the activity at hand, right? He's got to go get that hammer. So this hammer drops to the ground, doesn't cause any damage. That's what we call a near miss incident. Now, that same worker, same situation, working at height, has the hammer and he drops the hammer accidentally. That unexpected, undesirable event. This time it drops and it hits an employee. Or say maybe it falls and hits a piece of equipment and damages it. So now we have this unexpected, undesirable event, but this time, since it caused harm or damage, we refer to it maybe as an accident. Same event, or I guess I should use that word incident, but with different outcomes. So as we move forward today, when you hear that term incident, just remember that we're not always referring to that incident that involves an injury or damage.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great starting point and really, I think, helps to ground us all in speaking the same language as we move forward. So now, can we move on to what are these main factors that you see contributing to an incident?
All right. Yep. So this is my opinion. This is based on my experience reviewing and investigating workplace incidents over the years. But in my opinion, there's three primary causal factors that lead to majority of workplace incidents. Those being ignorance, rush for time, and complacency. So let me start by giving you an example, a simple example of an incident to explain why I'm focusing on these three factors. say a worker sees a 5-gallon can of kerosene, needs to get that and go refill the equipment. So that worker walks up to that 5-gallon can of kerosene sitting on the ground, bends down, picks it up, and immediately collapses in pain. This is an event that clearly meets our definition of an incident, right? It's unplanned, unexpected, and definitely led to harm. It caused a back injury. So I'm hoping a lot of you can relate to this. This is something that a lot of us have dealt with over the years in our work environments. And anyway, this is an example of improper lifting that leads to a back injury. So with this example, was the employee, again, we'll refer back to those 3 causal factors, ignorance, rush for time, or complacency, right? Was this employee ignorant? Were they not properly trained on safe lifting techniques? Or let's assume this employee was properly trained, but maybe they felt rushed for time, right? They didn't have time to stop, bend at the knees, lift with their legs, maybe turn with their feet and so forth. They twisted and they did everything wrong. So maybe they just felt rushed for time. They didn't have time to do that. They just reached it, grabbed it, and took off. All right. The other thing could be maybe it was complacency. You know, this worker probably lifted a 5-gallon can like that dozens of times, if not hundreds of times over their career, and nothing bad ever happened. So what I'm trying to get at by using this example is in addressing these 3 causal factors, it's not easy. All right. We've seen that behavior happen time and time again in our work environment, and eventually they do lead to incidents. What we're going to try and do is give you some insights into what you can do to address the ignorance, the training issue, the being rushed for time, and the complacency. And that's what we're going to focus on.
Okay. Well, then, let's dive deep into ignorance. What exactly do you mean by that in this context?
Yeah. So by ignorance, what we're referring to is this condition of being just uneducated, unaware, uninformed. All right. It's not the same as stupid. We don't like to use that term, and I'm going to avoid using that, even though I know a lot of people I work with, and I'm doing this training, they throw that word out. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people that may have gone through training, but that training wasn't as good as it could have been. So often means simply that they're just not properly trained to do their job in a safe manner. So asking our workers to do a job or task without that proper training, we shouldn't be surprised if it eventually leads to an incident. Now, someone once told me if the trainer hasn't trained, if the learner hasn't learned, the trainer hasn't taught. It's real easy for us to point a finger at the worker for not doing their job safely, but in most cases, that finger can be pointed right back to the trainer. All right. And so, not to belabor the point, giving our employees a copy of, for example, their safety orientation packet and saying, here, read this, sign it, that doesn't count as training. All right. We put it in their file and we show that they were trained on the safety orientation packet, but that's not training. Same goes with handing them a copy of a JSA and assuming that's all they need to perform that task safely. Or maybe reading a safety toolbox talk during their lunch break in a job trailer and having them all sign the back of that toolbox talk and putting it in a file and saying, hey, we just trained them. All right, that doesn't cut it. For training to be effective, there needs to be both communication and understanding. Janelle, let's go on to this next slide. I was a little hesitant to use this, but I'm going to go ahead and do this. All right. For one reason, this was kind of an embarrassing incident for me when I was doing some training, but we had a client, an HVAC contractor, and they were having issues with eye injuries. And the management team asked me to come in. This was back in my days as a loss control consultant I was actually working with the insurance broker at the time. And they said, can you come in and train our folks on the importance of eye safety? This was at 7 in the morning. I had a room of about 30 some folks. And I thought, gosh, eye safety, that's one of the most boring topics in the world. I got to come up with a way, especially at 7 in the morning, to kind of spice up this training. And I came up with this idea. That's a watermelon. You can see I carved out eye sockets and I put eggs in there. That's what those are. Those are eggs. And of course, I dressed it up with the hard hat and safety glasses. And I'm going to use this for my presentation. Eventually what I'm going to do is show them how I'm going to hit the face of this watermelon with safety glasses on, and those eggs aren't going to break. And of course, then I was going to remove them, hit them without the safety glasses. And the whole point of the training was for them to see the yolk pour down the front of this melon head. All right, so had good intentions. I'm trying to train them. I'm not just trying to talk to them or put slides up. I'm literally going to do a demonstration and an example for them. Where I erred is I used a slingshot and I used a ball bearing. And in hindsight, I don't know why I ever thought that would be the way to do this, but that's what I did. In the future, I started using a yardstick. whapped the face of it, and that worked great. So if anybody's thinking of trying to do this for their training, don't use a slingshot. So here it is, 7 in the morning. I got this thing sitting out there, and I did my presentation on eye safety, and then I started on with the demonstration. I pulled that slingshot back, and I shot a ball bearing at the safety glasses, and of course, they worked. The egg didn't break. Now, I didn't pull that slingshot back very far. I more or less tinked that ball bearing off the safety glass. Now, I was going to remove it, finish the demonstration, and somebody in the audience says, "Hey, let me try it." And I don't know if it was, again, early in the morning, maybe I didn't have enough coffee, I wasn't thinking, and I said, "Sure, come on up." And he grabbed the slingshot, and instead of tinking that ball bearing off of this melon head, he pulls this thing back as far as he could. Before I could stop and intervene, he let that ball bearing fly. And I don't know if it hit the hard hat, if it hit the safety glasses, it could have hit that tin that it's sitting in, but that ball bearing ricocheted back into the audience. And fortunately, nobody got injured. But it was a very embarrassing situation, and one that the management team at this company didn't look very kindly on. All right, now I had my safety glasses on. The individual with the slingshot that was doing the demonstration had his on. But anyway, the reason I point this out is because as bad as this training went at the time, I thought, oh boy, this wasn't good. Well, every time I went to their job sites afterwards, their guys called me, "Hey, there's the melon head guy." And they all reached for their safety glasses and kind of made a joke of it. But I thought, oh, that training was actually more effective than I thought. And that's about a year later, and I totally forgot about all of this. And a guy came up to me, this was a year later. He wasn't even with the same company. I was at a different job site. This guy came up to me and says, "Hey, I remember you. You're the Melanet guy." And I said, "Wow, my reputation is never going to end here." Well, the guy told me, he says, "Every time I put my safety glasses on, I think about that demonstration." And that was the impact that I had in this class. As bad as it could have gone, it still was effective. And what I want you guys to understand is when you do training, you got to think outside the box. You don't necessarily have to use a watermelon like I did, but there is a lot of things that you can do. I could do a whole presentation on how to spice up your training with the things that really, they cost nothing. At the most, you're going to spend maybe $5, but they're really good visual demonstrations. And what you're going to find is that you're going to not just communicate to your employees, but they're also going to gain an understanding of why it's important to do what you're asking.
Yeah, that's an excellent story and very creative, but it definitely had a lasting impact. All right. So bringing that to the job site and seeing all those safety glasses on was probably pretty meaningful for you after all that time.
Yes, it was.
Well, let's talk about being rushed. Move on to that second factor.
So the other factor, one of the 3 factors that I talked about, again, this is just this, there's no science behind this. This is just me being a loss control consultant for 20 years, seeing job sites and doing incident investigations. And I could almost always go back to these 3 causal factors. So being rushed, this is kind of one of the bigger ones, right? Being rushed is that feeling that you must do something quickly or without much care, as you can see by the definition here. The problem with that is that it often leads to our workers cutting corners or overlooking maybe important safety precautions that they should be following. Sometimes that feeling rushed isn't us cracking a whip saying, "Hey, you got to hurry up and get this done." Sometimes it's just an internal perception on their part. And I'll explain that here in a bit. So anyway, it's easy for us to point our finger at employees when they take those unnecessary risks because they're feeling rushed to get that job done. But what we need to understand is, that's partly human nature. Right? I think a lot of us are kind of pre-programmed or wired to be expedient, which simply means that we're trying to get the job done as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Now, I know there's a whole category of employees that you're definitely not going to put in that category. You're going to say, no, they're not trying to get things done efficiently. But for the most part, I think that's the case. Let's go back to the individual picking up that can of kerosene. I don't think that individual felt necessarily rushed, but they were still trying to be efficient, and the efficient way to pick it up for them was to bend down, grab it, and turn around and walk away. All right, they didn't stop to think, all right, it's going to take me an extra 2-3 seconds to bend at the knees, lift, and then turn with my feet and so forth. So I think that's kind of pre-wired into folks, and it makes our job difficult, no doubt. But anyway, Shanann, if you could go on to the next slide, I like to use examples. This is a picture that I took doing some training. I had a bunch of superintendents that were doing their spring startup training, and they flew them all in, and I had probably 20 some folks in the room, and I'm doing my training and I'm distracted out the window to my right. I kept seeing this individual climb up and down a ladder. And as you can see, there's a lot of problems with the setup of this ladder. I mean, at the very least, it doesn't extend 3 feet past the landing zone. And it's an extension ladder. It's got plenty of length there to extend that ladder to get that 3 feet. And it just didn't make sense. And I'm watching it. And we, as a class, we ended up started, they noticed I was focused on it and we used it as part of our training. But I took the picture. And what you don't see is off to the right, there's a service truck with the company name on it. So when we were done with the training, I reached out to that company. I actually called them and I got the email of their safety manager because I told him, I said, I told him who I was. I had a picture I wanted to send him. Felt kind of bad because I knew I was going to throw this guy under the bus, but I felt it needed to be addressed. If it was a job site that I was visiting, I would have intervened and coached on the spot, but I couldn't under the circumstances. So I get the supervisor, I get the safety manager to interact with me. He got my email, called me, and he was very appreciative. And I was just, trying to tell him I'm just trying to do my job and I didn't mean to get involved. But anyway, he went on to explain to me that the reason the ladder wasn't extended was because it was damaged, and it has something to do with how it was stored on the service rack. But the safety latches on the rungs, one of them was busted, and it wouldn't allow the ladder to slide. All right, I don't know the specifics, but anyway, that's kind of what I was told at the time. So this individual felt apparently at the time that he didn't have the time to stop. He got to the job site, realized that this ladder is not going to extend and he's going to have to either just get the work done the way it is, or his other option was to go back to the shop and replace the ladder. Now, it just so happened this was a spring day and it was actually very warm out that day. We had a pretty early heat wave. And there was more service calls he was scheduled to get done that day than what he might normally get. So he's working on this HVAC unit, probably trying to get the AC up and running for this office across the street from me. And just felt like he didn't have the time to go back and get that ladder replaced. So that's just another example of somebody maybe feeling rushed for time. And we need to figure out how to address those. And we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, it's nice that you got an opportunity to understand more about the reality of that situation too, that, you were able to find out more. So the third factor, complacency, a little bit different than what you learned about this particular job site. Talk about complacency.
Yeah, so complacency, and I'll tell you too, I could back up and say rush for time and even ignorance, they can all kind of combine into, the what we call causal factors for an incident. They're not exclusive in and of themselves. So, that individual that was rushed for time, apparently using that ladder, well, he probably, and like I said, I think I watched him do that maybe probably half a dozen times. And anybody that's used a ladder that doesn't extend past the landing zone and you're on a sloped roof and you're reaching back trying to get that you get your foot on that rung, that's a pretty unnerving moment there. And this individual, probably the first time he did that was probably pretty unnerving. But the second time he did it, maybe a little bit better. Third, fourth time, he started to get what I call complacent. Complacency is a state of mind where that person becomes too comfortable or so comfortable or confident with their job responsibilities that they stop taking proper safety precautions. So it's a dangerous mindset in any workplace. And in my opinion, this could be one of the most difficult factors to address. Let's, again, I like to use examples. Let's use an example that I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with. As you can see here, we have a traffic light. And if you think back when you first learned to drive a vehicle, you likely didn't run very many yellow lights, probably not many, at least on purpose. So, but as we become more comfortable with driving, the likelihood that you might have run a yellow light, that probably went up. Our heart rate may have gone up slightly the first few times that we did that, but as we did it more and more, it became easier and easier, and it almost becomes normal to perform that unsafe act. And so why is that? My theory is that nothing bad happened, right? I got through the intersection. The light was yellow. I got through the intersection. There was no accidents. There was no violation, all right? Nothing bad happened. This is a classic example of complacency. So using this example, what happens the next time you run that yellow light and there's a car at the intersection and they're wanting to turn left on that light? They're already inched out into the intersection and they want to turn left and the light's about ready to turn red. and they are a bad gauge of speed, or they have bad visual perception as far as how fast you're coming at them, and I don't know what I'm trying to say, the depth perception, right?
Mhm.
So you proceed to make, they proceed to make that turn on that yellow. And I think of my dad, he's 90 years old. He shouldn't probably be driving, but he does it. And he's going to someday maybe get in one of those situations. He may be a little more aggressive than he should, but his perception of depth and speed, probably not as good as they are. One of those folks that are used to running yellow lights, they're probably going to come together one of these times. And, heaven forbid that happens, but that's when complacency catches up with you, right? So going back to our definition, what is complacency? It's just a state of mind where that person becomes too comfortable, too confident in their job responsibilities, and they stop taking proper safety precautions. So you can kind of start to see how difficult it is to address this one specifically. I mean, we become complacent one way or another until something bad happens, and then we tend to remain until something bad happens, and then we finally learn that complacency, at least short term, it kind of goes away. So anyway, these are some of the things we're up against. Those are, again, 3 factors. I call them causal factors. I don't know that they're root causes for incidents. I think root causes almost always go back to kind of I hate to put it all on senior management, but I think there's a level of responsibility at the management level to make sure that we're trained properly, so we're not ignorant, that we don't feel rushed for time, so that we don't take shortcuts, and that and this, again, tough one, that we keep our employees from becoming complacent.
Yeah, I mean, think about all the things we do on a daily basis, right? That it's routine. When things become routine, you become complacent. And at the job site, that can be a really dangerous thing. And all 3 factors really paint a very challenging picture at the job site. So does this mean then incidents are just inevitable?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I've gotten in trouble before by saying that not all incidents are preventable. I'd ask the question, and I won't answer this: can you prevent all incidents? That's up to you guys to think through and decide whether or not that's possible. But I will say this: that the odds are stacked against us, right? If we're trying to prevent all incidents. But I do believe that if you understand these factose, these 3 factors that we just talked about, that's the first step in prevention. What we need to do is recognize that our work environments aren't, and that our worker environments are inherently dangerous, right? We haven't even talked about the hazards that contribute to this. I mean, we talked about the guy at the ladder that didn't extend the ladder. Well, that resulted from a hazard, an actual ladder that was damaged, but the employee made the conscious decision to use it anyway because they felt rushed for time. So we can't just talk about unsafe acts, unsafe unsafe acts without talking about unsafe conditions. So, and you think about that, the construction environment is one of the most dynamic environments that exist, right, from a hazard standpoint. So humans, yes, they can be a source of danger because they perform unsafe acts. But you got to remember, they're not robots. They're not programmed to perform in a consistent manner time and time again. So I guess what I'm trying to say here, and I'm going to kind of meandering around here, but there's a combination of unsafe work conditions and unsafe behaviors. Again, we talked about the being ignorant, rush for time, and complacent. Those odds are stacked against us, and that's what we're up against.
So dig in a little bit more on the relationship between the people and those hazards that are at the job site.
All right. So kind of goes without saying that hazards, unsafe work conditions are a significant factor, right, leading to incidents. We're not here to make that surprise announcement here. But what's interesting to me here is that this study that shows the hazards only account for about 10% of incidents, and that the majority of those incidents are actually caused by human factors, right? They're unsafe acts. My take is slightly different on this. Again, I mentioned, I think that unsafe acts result from unsafe conditions in a lot of cases. Again, ladder. Guy used the ladder because it was damaged. It was an unsafe condition, chose to use it anyway, and that became an unsafe act. If the ladder had worked properly, he wouldn't have performed the unsafe act, most likely. So this is compounded when an employee tries to compensate for an unsafe condition, and they further and they're further put at risk due to factors that we've discussed: the ignorance, rush for time, complacency. So anyway, that's what we're trying to get at here. And if you look at this study, I've seen this out there, I don't know how many times, and it just always kind of bothers me a little bit that we try and put the most of the blame on the employee. Yeah, conditions are a big part of it. But again, I kind of indicated that managers kind of play a key role in this. We need to see, for example, let's go back to the employee walking across the work site and picking up the can of kerosene improperly, using improper lifting techniques. If I'm a manager, I'm the foreman on that site, and I see that, and I don't intervene and coach them on proper lifting, it kind of comes back to what I would call maybe the management level there, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here. So we look at this slide, and I just want to caution people, I don't necessarily believe in it 100% that we could put the blame on our employees as much as maybe a combination of unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. And that'll be our focus here moving forward.
Yeah, that's very, very logical. Is there behind this distribution some sort of theory that explains it?
Yeah, so if you go to the next slide, I think a lot of you are kind of familiar with Heinrich's accident causation theory, right? Most of you, I'm sure, understand this, but just to be clear, let's go ahead and review this theory. It suggests that for every major injury that occurs, again, this was based on OSHA injury illness records, for every major injury that occurs, and I don't know if you want to define that as a fatality, some sort of crippling injury, maybe paralysis or loss of limb, there's going to be 29 minor injuries. Then underneath that, according to Heinrich's theory, there's 300 incidents where there was no injury. I'm sorry, yeah, where there's no injuries, they're near misses. And that's what you see at the base of the pyramid. I want to expand on that. If we can go to the next slide. Yeah, let's go through this slide here real quick. So this is what I call the incident causation theory. You can see in a lot of ways it looks similar to Heinrich's theory, but there's, as you can see, additional layers. Essentially, what this theory holds is that for every one critical incident, all right, that incident again resulting in maybe death, dismemberment, paralysis. You could define that a lot of different ways, but let's use those as examples. For every one of those critical incidents, there can be tens of thousands of unsafe acts or unsafe conditions that occurred prior to that critical incident. And as the theory holds, then we can expect to see several near misses along the way. And we can also expect to see both minor and major incidents, such as maybe a twisted ankle or a broken leg. So looking at this pyramid, if you only investigate those incidents at the top of the pyramid, those resulting in harm or damage, those are the top 3 layers. That's considered a reactive response. All right, we don't want to be reactive. So let's just look at this pyramid then and say, what if you started with maybe the near misses at the bottom of the pyramid? You could collect near miss data and investigate those events, the same as those resulting in injury and damage. That's would obviously be what we'd call being more proactive. And by the way, AlignOps has a safety product that has an app that if you subscribe to that service, it's called our observation app, and it's free to every employee in the organization, and they can use that very easily. It's a single one-page app to document those near misses. So if you're looking for a way, because I mean, that's what most people say is, oh yeah, I know obviously if we could investigate the near misses, that would help, but how do we know about them? That's one example of a way to get the employees to report some of those near misses, and it gives you a way to investigate them. So anyway, to be truly proactive, you just need to find a way to address those unsafe acts, unsafe conditions at the base of the pyramid. And again, I know that's easier said than done. So, Janan, if you don't mind, let's go to the next slide again. I like to refer to examples, and using this incident causation theory we just discussed, let's go back to this picture and talk about the worker using the ladder in an unsafe manner. So according to this theory, that worker can go up and down this ladder 30,000 times before he falls and possibly dies or is critically injured. So chances are he'll never use the ladder that many times in this manner, but that shouldn't matter. The fact is he's still playing with the odds, right? And they're going to catch up with him at one time or another. Also, he doesn't have to experience that critical incident for this theory to play out, right? He could fall and maybe twist his ankle. Maybe he reaches back for that first rung and his foot catches it, but it slides off and he hits the next rung, and that's what causes the injury. Maybe he falls and he breaks his leg, or maybe he just slips but he caught himself trying to reach back to grab that ladder. Nothing bad ever happened. That's that near miss. So one of our first questions should be, why did the ladder get damaged? We want to investigate that. So I'm not trying to tell you that all your investigation should be focused on being rushed for time and complacent, what have you. All right, there's usually an element in there, like I said, of some sort of a hazard. And we need to address that. So if there's an issue, I think the guy told me there's something with the ladder rack that caused that damage. Well, they obviously need to fix that to prevent this incident from possibly happening again, right? So we also need to ask, though, why did this employee decide to use the ladder in an unsafe manner? You know, we stated earlier that he felt rushed for time, but it could have been also due to ignorance. Maybe the training wasn't what it should have been. You know, and maybe we told him, yeah, the ladder needs to extend 3 feet past the landing zone, but this worker chose not to for whatever reason. Yes, we talked about him being rushed for time. There's too many service calls scheduled that day. He felt like he didn't have time, you know, to go back to the shop and replace the ladder. So we know that was a factor. But we could also look at this and say it was due to complacency. Maybe he's used a ladder like this previously multiple times, and again, that nothing bad ever happened. So there's a lot of things to consider here, but since I didn't have the opportunity to actually investigate this particular situation, we're left to make only assumptions. And, you know, hopefully, though, this gives you a picture, I guess, of how unsafe conditions, unsafe acts work together to kind of lead to incidents like this occurring.
So with all of these factors and these theories that you've presented here, what would you say is really one key takeaway for the audience?
All right, let's go ahead. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit here. So I suppose a key takeaway, as I see it, is that first off, incidents may seem inevitable, but understanding those root causes, right? I should say causal factors. The ignorance, rush for time, complacency, that coupled with unsafe conditions, this gives us the power to address them proactively and hopefully prevent them. So by implementing best practices, again, proper training, time management, maintaining a vigilant safety culture, getting those near misses to be reported and actually acting on them. Of course, doing your site hazard assessments, right? We got to do those. Hopefully, if we do this, and these are considered, I call them, their best practices, that we could significantly reduce that likelihood of these incidents occurring again in the workplace.
Yeah. Well, let's start to round out the presentation by you walking us through those 10 best practices that you've referenced.
Yeah. So I suppose we'll try and get through these 10 best practices. I wanted to just explain to you what these are, and they don't all necessarily tie specifically into some of those causal factors that we discussed earlier, but they're still relevant. This study, I think, it was done by the Construction Industry Institute. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty dated study. It's a few years back, but I still feel it's very significant and it still applies today. So what CII did, the Construction Industry Institute, they reviewed OSHA injury illness data provided to them by 22 of their member companies. And these are large contractors. These are prime contractors. But it included over like 7 billion hours worked. So it was a pretty significant study. And then they put out, while they interviewed these companies, right? And again, all of them construction companies, they took the results from the OSHA logs, their actual injury illness rates, and they tabulated those results based on the questions that were asked. So we're going to go through them. There's 10 slides. We go through these pretty quickly, and then we'll leave plenty of time for any questions, question and answer session when we're done. But let's go ahead. If you don't mind, Jeanette, let's go to that first slide. So this one speaks to management commitment to safety. And I don't know if you could read this very well, but there's some small numbers on there. But at the bottom, there's a question, and it says, how frequently does top management participate in recordable incident investigations? So if that contractor has somebody in top management, right? We're not talking about just a superintendent. We're talking about somebody a little higher up than that. If they're participating in every recordable incident investigation, they had an injury illness rate based on their review of their OSHA logs of 1.2. Versus those companies that didn't do that, at least they were 50% or fewer times where they had somebody in top management investigate them. They had OSHA injury rate of 6.89. To me, that speaks volumes for from the standpoint of management commitment. And when you do have these incidents occur, and these are just, again, recordable incidents, these aren't the near misses and everything that we were talking about earlier. But just at that level, these companies had a much lower injury rate than those companies that weren't doing it.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And as we go through these slides, you're going to see that throughout. So again, we'll go through and I'll try not to belabor each of these points, but the next one, slide 2. Again, we're talking about management commitment to safety. Does the company president or senior management review safety performance reports? And safety performance reports can be insurance loss runs. They could be accident injury reports we just talked about. They could be inspection reports that are turned in. As a loss control consultant, I would go out and I'd do inspections of work sites and I would turn these reports in. And, if the safety manager's getting them, that's great. And that's probably 90% of the time, that's what happened. And they reviewed them and then talked to folks out in the field. But those companies that actually took those reports and provided a senior level manager, in this case, the president, CEO at that level, those companies that actually had those folks review those type of reports, they had an OSHA injury illness rate of less than 1, 0.97. Those companies that didn't, again, 6.89 was their injury illness rates.
No, that's huge discrepancy.
Yeah, the numbers are pretty staggering when you look at these.
Yeah.
All right, let's look at that third slide here. Demonstrated management commitment to safety. Again, we're talking about, what is the frequency of safety inspections by non-facility personnel? And again, those non-facility personnel, that was me as a loss control consultant. I'd go out and I'd do these inspections, or maybe a large corporation where they had a corporate safety team that would go out and investigate some of their field offices and do some job site inspections. There's a lot of different ways you could look at this, but anybody, what we're really getting at here is those companies that don't just have a foreman take a sheet of paper out there and weekly just check off a few things and turn that in. These companies that go above and beyond that, they're doing weekly or bi-weekly inspections by somebody outside of their, work site. They had a 1.33 OSHA injury rate versus those companies that maybe did it monthly or annual, 2.63.
Yeah.
Inspections, again, is huge, guys. We gotta identify those hazards. We could eliminate a lot of these hazards. We can eliminate a lot of the opportunities for the employees to interact with that hazard and to perform in an unsafe way.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, the next one I already spoke to, but
I see that.
It's relevant too, because having that site safety specific program.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So what we're talking about here is specifically that. Yes. Do you have a site safety program? A lot of companies have a written safety and health program, right? You're required to, and you're going to have that. But do you come up with a very specific plan given the circumstances of the type of project that you're working on that are specific to that site? That's going above and beyond. And those companies that actually do that, they had a 1.76 OSHA injury illness rate versus companies that do not have a site-specific safety plan, 5.43. Again, pretty drastic difference.
Yeah.
So let's go on to slide 5. So safety training and education, again, we're looking at that. And this is probably the one that I think is the low-hanging fruit that most of you guys that are listening in on this today can go back and evaluate your training to see how effective it actually is. This one's specific to worker safety orientation training. Remember, I said you can't just hand them the packet, read it, sign it, and consider that training. That's not training. All right, those companies that have a formal training process that actually review that safety orientation with their employees, they have a much lower injury illness rate, 1.76 versus 5.72.
Mm-hmm.
So slide 6, pretty much the same thing we're talking about. And I kind of overlap those a little bit there. The safety orientation training that's provided to workers, again, how good is it? How effective is it? Do we assign a mentor to work with them maybe the first week? There's a lot of things that go into this, but those companies that have a very formal process, 1.51 versus informal 3.8. And I can tell you, this was outside of the construction industry, but I went to shouldn't name a name here, but I'm saying this because I was really impressed with what they did, but it was an Amazon distribution facility down in Tennessee. And I felt like I actually learned stuff when I went through the orientation. It wasn't just, here, review this, sign it, or watch this video. They actually, And as a loss control consultant, I'm pressed for time, right? I don't want to go to a site that I'm expecting to be there for 3-4 hours and have to spend an hour doing training, but that's what they did. But if you looked at their injury rates, my gosh, it was amazing. I mean, literally, I'm walking through the facility, and one of the things you're supposed to do is, and they trained me very specifically on this, make eye contact with any forklift operators when you reach an intersection. And I tried to do that, and the forklift operator never looked at me, drove through the intersection, and immediately got stopped by the individual that was with me and got coached. We'll just leave it at that. They were coached on the site. It's pretty amazing. Their orientation in the safety program was at a level that it's really cool to see. But anyway, I kind of got off topic. Let's keep on with the slides here. Let's go on to the next one. All right. So we're talking about training again. This time we're talking about how much training do you provide to your management level supervisors, right? Do we send our foreman to an OSHA 30 hour, for example, or an OSHA 10 hour at a minimum? That's kind of what we're talking about here. Are we talking, a little bit more in-depth training with them where they maybe come in for spring startup and they get a full day's worth of training on various topics? So we're looking at companies that provide over 4 hours of that type of training for their managers and supervisors. They had an incident rate of 1.07 versus those that did less than 4 hours, 2.0.
Mm.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. Again, we're talking about training. When are toolbox safety meetings held? Right. I don't know if hardly anybody that does daily. There are companies that do it. I know they're out there. Weekly is kind of the norm. Most companies will do a weekly safety talk, and some companies do them monthly. Right. But those companies that do them daily, 1.01 versus weekly 2.0, they cut their OSHA injury illness rates in half. This one to me kind of starts to speak to that topic of complacency. Right. We're keeping safety in front of them. There's so many things we could do to address complacency, and I kind of skipped over those earlier, but maybe we get to the question and answer session, this will come up and we could talk about some of those things that you could do. But one of the most effective trainings, I'll just say this, it was an employee that, or it was a company that had issues with folks not, I'm going to lose my power here. I got to plug my laptop in. I'm sorry, folks. Do this real quick. I hate to have my screen go blank on us. So they had issues with cell phone use and employees being distracted. And they brought in, they got a hold of a local safety council, and they brought in a father who lost his daughter in a similar situation. And you talk about powerful, you talk about addressing complacency. I mean, there's things you could do along those lines, folks, that can address that pretty quickly. All right, sorry, let's keep moving. Try to keep us on schedule.
Go ahead.
Yep, so this one's kind of interesting. Are supervisors evaluated on safety? I know it says recognition and rewards, and I never did quite tie these two together, but do you evaluate your supervisors on safety? We're constantly holding our employees to our safety requirements, right? We're evaluating them. When they don't follow a safety procedure, we tend to write them up, all right? But are we doing that with the supervisors? So use that kerosene example. The employee that supervisor may have seen that employee or an employee like this one lift improperly dozens of times throughout the week. Did they ever intervene and stop to coach that person on the spot to say, hey, you know what our policy is on lifting, use your legs, don't bend over like that, whatever it might be. So we need to hold those supervisors and hold them accountable and evaluate them to enforcing our safety rules. But anyway, those companies that do that, huge difference here, 2.0 OSHA injury illness rate versus 8.89 for those companies that don't.
That's one of the biggest differences we've seen so far.
Yeah, and to me, this goes back to speaking of management commitment to safety. I mean, our supervisors aren't going to do that. They're not going to go to that level and coach employees unless somebody higher up at a management level expects that and holds them accountable to it. So, All right, let's finish this up. This slide 10 here. So accident incident reporting investigation, the number of near misses reported and recorded. Again, I think this speaks to the complacency issue. If we can get more involved with those near misses and intervene before something bad happens, we have a much better chance of reducing incidents, at least the frequency. So anyway, those companies that turn in more than 50 have a 0.057 versus those that fewer than 50, 2.35.
Interesting.
Yeah, so a lot of stuff here we're throwing at you, and I know it seems like we covered a lot of stuff, and I just want to go back to this, that opening statement. I think I said something about a silver bullet. I wish I could give you guys that silver bullet, so you could go out and prevent all these unsafe acts, unsafe conditions. And unfortunately, that just doesn't exist. My goal, at least my hope here, is that at the very least that you found some of this information insightful, and more importantly, that maybe you could take some of this information, go back to your company and build on or improve in some way your current safety efforts. We're not asking you to implement every one of these 10 best practices, but start somewhere. At least pick 1, 2, 3 of them out and see where it goes. That's my hope anyway today. And again, I just wanted to give you some insight as to some of the things that are kind of behind the scenes that lead to some of these incidents, and hopefully give you a better understanding of how you might be able to address them moving forward.
Thank you, Steve. I mean, it is a lot, but I love your point about start somewhere, right? Pick one of the 10, or just start giving everybody the ability to submit what they see at the job site. So at least you're starting to look at what's going on, and maybe you can start thinking about how to be proactive.
Yeah.
We do have one comment and a question. So I'll start with the comment because I think it's really a great one around culture too. He says the situations like the latter one are often related to productivity too. Someone doesn't want their day to fall behind because they had to replace equipment. So perhaps that company could have someone offer to bring out a new ladder instead of the worker driving back to the shop. I found that making safety as convenient as possible will help with compliance.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. That would be a great recommendation in this case, is to instruct that worker to say, you know what, the ladder, put it back on the service truck, go on to your next job, and we will meet you there with a new ladder, and then you could come back. I mean, it will set you back a little bit, but it's not going to be the same as, for example, coming back to the shop. So that's an excellent point that participant made.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Agree with it 100%.
Yeah. The question is, the next question is, will you be able to share the links to the studies you reference in the presentation?
All right. The CII study, I'm not sure specifically what they're asking about, like Heinrich's theory. By incident causation theory, there's no study behind that, right? That's just me putting slides together and suggesting that 30,000 unsafe acts, unsafe conditions can occur before that one critical. I mean, that's not hard and set, right? Something that's more serious, more critical in nature. That number at the base of the pyramid could be maybe 1,000. I mean, you could only stand on a ledge 20 feet up without fall protection so many times before you're likely going to fall and break your neck. But there's some instances where maybe I don't want to use an example because I don't want to minimize a workplace hazard, but there's some that just aren't as critical or potentially severe as others, that, yeah, maybe you can get away with doing that, multiple times, 30,000 times. I mean, that example of 30,000, if you want to know where that came up with, it's based on an assumption of 30 unsafe acts or unsafe conditions occurring a day for an individual. So if I'm an employee and I work for a contractor and I'm out there, I'm very easily exposed to 30 unsafe conditions and or unsafe acts throughout my day. That's, to me, is probably a very conservative number. Take that times 5 days a week times 50 weeks per year, you get 7,500 opportunities for that individual to have a critical incident. So if we use that theory that I put 30,000 at the base, that's saying once every 4 years, I'm going to be subject to that critical injury if I'm continuing to be exposed to those hazards. Again, there's no science behind that. That's just me putting some numbers down to use to get people to think about preventing unsafe acts, unsafe conditions. So I'm sure I probably didn't answer that question. If there's a specific study outside of the CII, just let me know and we'll follow up.
Well, I know there's that CII data, and then there's always lots of data coming out of OSHA as well in their education. So, but it's a good question. Maybe we can think about adding it to the slides. Yeah. There is a question, can we receive a copy of your presentation? Someone wasn't able to join until later. We are recording this and it will be sent out to all of you that are participating once the recording is available. We do have some more time for questions. I don't see any in the Q&A section outside of what we just reviewed. But you did mention you might want to talk a little bit more about kind complacency. Oh, we have another question coming in. Let's get to the audience first. What do
Okay.
you say to a company who begins to improve safety programs and initiatives, and unfortunately, incidents increase versus decrease?
Yeah, sometimes I just keep in mind, folks, I call myself a very I keep it simple, stupid, right? I don't have a really good answer for this one. I think sometimes it's dumb luck. Because everything that happens that we're talking about, like this incident causation theory, it doesn't happen incrementally in equal steps over time. We could go 3-4 years with nothing bad ever happening, and then all of a sudden we have 2-3 bad things happen. It's really difficult to answer that question. What I would say, boy, I don't know if this answers the question. I'm bad at doing this on the spot, but I had a customer that had a really low mod rate. And anybody that knows the insurance industry, a low mod rate means that they had very, very low frequency of insurance claims for work comp. And they were like that for several years in a row. And then all of a sudden, it went back the other direction. It started going up. But they said, we're doing the same things that we've always done. What's causing this, right? Because their safety program didn't change. And to me, I think at the time we discussed this and we thought, well, maybe that pendulum started swinging back because we weren't putting as much effort and focus behind it as we used to to try and get that mod rate lowered in the first place. And once you get it lowered, I think that's human nature to kind of relax a little bit. So, maybe you got to look internally at the motivation that's driving the safety program at the time. But again, let me read that question. Again, I'm terrible at doing this on the fly, folks, but I don't know that there's a real good answer to that. I'd like to say, hey, it's just in some cases dumb luck, but I know that's not the answer that senior management's going to want to hear. But I would instead maybe focus on the steps that you are implementing to maintain that lower injury rate, and to just realize that it's not consistent over time. Unfortunately, there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be some lulls, but there's going to be some bad moments too. So.
Is there anything to the fact that their safety program hadn't changed that maybe they needed to take a look at things
Well,
that they weren't taking into account in their safety program?
yeah, I mean, to me, it's just like how individuals become complacent. I think some of these safety programs can become complacent. I mean, we're kind of on cruise control after a while because we haven't had anything bad happen, and life's good, and we tend to get complacent. So maybe every now and then, once a year, you sit down with a team and you pull your insurance folks in, maybe some people from the local trade association, and you say, here's what we're doing. Let's see what we could do to change things up a little bit so that we don't get in that complacency mode, I suppose.
Yeah. We got a couple more questions here. We do daily safety meetings similar to a toolbox talk, but site and task specific, run by a foreman. There's a concern that some foremen pencil whip these attendance forms. Do you have any suggestion to ensure quality in these types of meetings?
I don't know if this applies 100% to that, but what I would do is, if you're concerned about them being pencil whipped, I think I would take those and I would look at them at the end of the week, end of the month, whatever, and have a team review them and say, all right, we're going to pick out the top 3 of these. What do they call them? Well, these safety meetings that were discussed.
Yeah.
So I think they take these documents and they pick maybe the top 3, and then maybe hand out a gift certificate or just recognition to those 3 that were turned in, and say, here's what we're looking for. These are good examples. And you're kind of implying then by those that are not turning them in that maybe they're not as good as what they could be. And then hopefully maybe they start to see the picture and say, oh, you know what? I want to make that list. I want that $25 gift card or whatever it might be. I want to be recognized for that. And maybe they kind of start picking up their game a little bit. Try that maybe as an example.
Yeah, incentivize them, and then against their peers. Yeah. Here's another one. For a company that's been around with tenured employees but is under new ownership, and said owners are looking to create a strong safety culture, where do you suggest they start?
So the company's been around for a while, new ownership, looking to create a strong safety culture. Boy, there's 100 ways I could kind of go with this one. I think what I would do is I'd start out by doing, you could God, I'd like to share this with them, but I don't think I can because I think it's copyrighted. But there's a best practice survey, and actually, I take that back. Safety reports. AlignOps has that program where we can have a consultant sit down and actually do a best practice review. It's
That's really
very,
good.
very detailed, very intensive, and it's score based. And I will tell you that if you score 50%, 60% on this thing, you're actually doing really good. Because to be honest with you, if you did everything on this best practice survey, you'd probably run your company out of business because it's just probably not cost effective over time. There's some point in the middle there, though, where you could implement these best practices at a level where you're going to get the maximum return on it. And I don't know where that is, but I would tell you if we did this best practice survey and we scored your organization, it's a pretty critical assessment of what you guys are doing from a safety standpoint. What we do then is work with you on a monthly, annual, whatever basis makes sense for you to go back and do that audit on a regular basis and identify areas where you didn't score as well as you thought you could have and that you want to improve. That'd be a
Yeah.
good way to kind of start the process out and get the new ownership involved in that. And because it's a very top level management commitment to make this thing happen, and it gets them involved in a quick way.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about taking stock of where you are today with, the investment of the time and the management commitment to that, and getting the people that have been there for a while involved in it. It all sounds like that would be a good way to kind
Yeah,
of show everybody's part of creating the culture.
it's done as objectively as possible, so that when that review is done, say a year later, it's the same questions, same objectivity, and so that you can actually see hopefully an improvement in your score. Maybe you score 56%, you score 68% the next year. You're going to see those incremental increases, and it kind of keeps a senior management team involved in the process.
So the next question is employee and supervisor safety perception surveys. Are those beneficial in your experience?
Boy, I've been involved with those, not as much on the construction side as maybe a manufacturing setting. I found them very interesting. Other than the time I did them, I was doing the night shift and I had to work and do the surveys with each of the employees from 8 o'clock at night till 8 in the morning. That part wasn't very much fun, but this company I think had really good results based on those surveys. It really depends. The information is always eye-opening. I will tell you that the safety perception surveys. It's really the benefit comes down to whether or not management uses that information and actually acts on it, and whether or not they're keeping that. Letting the employees know what the information is that was provided and what they're doing specifically. So they need to be open with the employees as well as far as the data they collected and what they're going to do to address it. But I think overall, yeah, they can be very effective if it's managed properly by management.
Next question, how do you feel about good catch programs and how do you suggest the program be driven? We're currently running a good catch program, QR code, easy access, but we're having trouble gaining participation.
Yeah, I love good catch programs. We spent so much time documenting what's not being done right. And if you can find an employee that say use their safety glasses in a face shield while using a chop saw, it's like, oh, that's awesome. All right, that's what we taught you to do, and you actually took the time to do it. I want to take that information and I want to share it with everybody, right? Sometimes that employee doesn't necessarily want that recognition, but boy, I'm a big time proponent of those good catch programs. And I think, trying to think back an example, this is again manufacturing shop, but they took those and they posted the top 5 and they provided recognition for the person that turned it in. All right. So it wasn't necessarily recognition for the person that was caught doing something correctly. And it was, I don't want to take it away from that, but it was really the goal was so the people that were actually turning them in were getting recognized, and they might've been getting, something simple like a $5 coupon to use at the cafeteria or whatever at their facility, but you could come up with something to reward. And I don't want to make it sound like you got to give a monetary reward for everything. I honestly think just verbal recognition, acknowledgement goes a real long ways. But again, I would have a group review those that are being turned in and say, hey, this is an example of what we're looking for. We're going to recognize these people for going above and beyond and doing a good catch here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's excellent. Well, there's a comment, the last comment, which is a great way to wrap it up since we are at the end, but This attendee says, we're a large company, 300 wide. We do follow these procedures that you mentioned, and it does work. Our 300 is 0.93 with OSHA, and our injury rate is low. We do weekly safety meetings, and we put everyone in classes. It makes everyone accountable.
Yeah, you summed it up for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Steve, for your time. Can't thank you enough. Really valuable. And to all the participants who spent this hour with us. Again, we'll be sending out the recording. We'll find a way to make sure we can any of those graphs that we showed during the presentation, we can reference those. And yeah, it's been great, Steve. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Janan.
Thanks all.
Bye, guys.
Happy holidays, everyone.